actually think you'd have to change the managers, not only their comp, but so interestingly enough, your idea about quality control and managers being responsible for quality control, I actually think that is the current model, and that's actually the challenge. Because what I think for a lot of sales organizations, they started to look as a salesperson, not as a salesperson. There's like, hey, there's X number of sales seats. We slot a cog in there. They should be able to follow some program. We're going to give them X number of leads, or however they're going to develop their pipeline, and they should hit this percentage, and we'll get X amount of revenue from them. So hey, if we want to increase revenue, we either have to have more headcount, or we're just going to double quota for them. But then as a sales manager, they're just looking at it as a, how do I optimize this machine versus how do I actually grow the success of this individual.
Hi friends, welcome to the Sales Enablement Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Paul. That was David J.P. Fisher, D-Fish as I call him. And David is president of Rockstar Consulting, as well as an author and keynote speaker. Now we started a conversation today talking about D-Fish's journey into sales. Started like a fair number of people selling Cutco knives, which is a fantastic experience for young people who want to get a taste of sales and selling. We talk about the importance of finding your own path in sales, right? How to sell in a way that's aligned with who you are, your values, and your character. We also dig into the importance of win rate as the essential KPI of how you're doing in front of the buyer. Well, we get into all that and much, much more. But before we get to David, I want to remind you to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to it, iTunes, Spotify. I also want to remind you to check out my latest book, Sell Without Selling Out. It's a modern human-centric framework for increasing your win rates and shortening decision cycles without using the salesy behaviors that buyers hate. It's available everywhere you shop for books, online, and in stores. Okay, let's jump into it.
David, thank you so much for having me back. Super excited to be here.
Oh, good. Well, so I don't have the big news. You have the big news because you've got a newborn.
Number two. Yeah.
Number two. And so give us the details.
He's a beautiful baby boy. He's 2.5 weeks old. Ferris John.
Which I love the name,
thank
by the
you.
way.
Yeah. There was two that we were picking between, and we decided to wait until the baby showed up. We did the same thing with our first son. Of course, this time the baby showed up, and I thought he was a Ferris, and my wife thought he was the other one. And so he did not get officially named until 20 minutes before we left the hospital, because we had to fill out the birth certificate. But there are times when having a background in sales is useful. So.
Oh, so you thought that was, so it's sort of appropriate. You're in Chicago. You got a boy named Ferris Fisher's day off.
And we live one town away from the home of the fictional Ferris Bueller. So yes, this is his hood for sure. Right. It works.
A good movie to watch anytime you can. So. Well, that's exciting. So you're probably not getting much sleep these days. We were sort of commiserating about our lack of sleep before we started recording. I don't have the same excuse you do. I just too much travel this week, I think.
It's a completely valid excuse. The only difference is you get to not travel and rest up. I don't have that luxury for at least a little while.
No, I'm going to have uninterrupted sleep tonight.
That
you
is
are not.
correct.
Yes, that's true. But you chose that life. I remember back in the day when I had, unfortunately, we timed it so that one learned how to sleep before the other came along. So, yeah.
It's worth it. I've been told it's worth it in the end.
Wife doing? Your wife's doing fine?
She's doing
Mom's
great.
Doing fine?
Yeah, I mean, it's a cliche that you hear, and I think you need a little bit of age to really appreciate it. We're all healthy, and as long as everybody's healthy, that everything else you can fix and figure out, and but as long as you have that, as long as you have your health, you're good, and everybody's healthy, knock on wood. So we're great.
And remind me of your Ferris's older brother's name? Liam, that's right. Yeah, two great names in the family. And how is Liam taking things so
We're
far?
super lucky. He's loving being a big brother. The other day we caught him singing "Twinkle Twinkle Little Star" to his little brother, trying to get him to go to sleep. So we're like, all right, I actually was trying to move the baby to another room, to my office, to take him with me, and Liam goes, "No, Daddy, he stays here." And I was like, all right, good. You're already learning to be protective of your baby brother. That's a good sign.
Yeah. And then the pendulum swings at one point and becomes the baby brother's chief
Yeah.
torturer, and that's
Yeah, I've got two
back to
brothers.
his
That's how it works, Nobody picks on my brother but me.
Yeah, well, no, let's see. Yeah, I was the youngest of four, so I was on the right. I was
You got the
yeah.
worst end of it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. One older brother in particular that took particular interest in torturing me through a good chunk of my life. So yeah.
Hopefully it won't be that bad.
Well, as I tell people, is resilience, right? That's where you
You
develop.
got to get toughened up somehow.
Yeah, he made sure. So, so yeah. So what's new? I mean, with you, I was read the article you'd post on LinkedIn this morning that I wanted to chat about because we touched on it before, but you, among many people, got your start selling Cutco.
I was one of those Cutco people. Yeah. So it's been interesting, and I think you might be referencing a post I made about the fact that one of the things that I think helped me very early on in my sales career was feeling very comfortable selling exactly what somebody needed, and no more, no less, which allowed me to be very persuasive when I thought there's a fit, and I knew I had that conviction. But I also was very comfortable realizing, hey, this maybe isn't a good fit, and so I'm not going to try to push or to use your parlance. I wasn't going to sell without by selling out. So I right. You're welcome.
Thanks for the plug.
But so that allowed me to be I think a little more persuasive, because I for lack of a better saying it, I was right with myself. Right. I never walked out of a sales presentation, even back, this is, when I was younger and had more hair.
5, 10
I always felt confident. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it is such an important thing to think about for a seller standpoint is when do you reach that point when you feel, because this confidence, but it's really a mixture of confidence with yourself and with the product and service you're selling as well. But I still remember, hitting that point. There's always change because I was jumping into new things relatively quickly. But I do think you learn to sort of, you find like you're in the right situation with product and service, then it's okay to be yourself. It's okay to not sort of have to feel like you have to put on this salesy air. And I think that's a hard barrier for many sellers to cross, is feeling comfortable with themselves.
I would 100% agree. I mean, one of the things that I think is always, it goes back and forth. One of the things I've loved about a selling career, especially an entrepreneurial selling career, is it really is a place to practice finding out who you are, right? It is definitely a path of self-awareness. When you're dealing with so many people, you're dealing with the ups and the downs. You kind of have a forum or a playground where you get to practice this idea of finding out who you are, and then in the cyclical nature of it, the more you find out who you are, the better you are at selling, right? So it does kind of make you sales is a profession that makes you look in the mirror, often on a daily basis. Who am I? How am I going to act? How am I going to treat people? And am I going to be comfortable with that?
Well, but it requires, to that point, a certain self-awareness that clearly lots of people still have a hard time sort of crossing that bridge to that point, is because, we see the salesy behavior. The buyers talk about us making presentations on customers this week and a client and team of sales leaders, and it's throwing up some stats from seen from various reports and books and research about 80% of C-suite executives find no value in their interaction with sellers, or one I posted about this week on LinkedIn that came from some research in a book called Strikingly Different Selling from Jennifer Colosimo that said, and this was research done across thousands of different buyers, was 42% of sellers, B2B sellers, are unmemorable, basically indistinguishable one from the other. And so virtually half, and for me, that's the half that is trying to be someone other than themselves, right? They're putting on the salesy act, right? And you think, oh gosh, if you do this for any period of time, or at least for me, it seemed like, God, you have to be able to make that transition to saying, look, I feel comfortable with who I am as sort of a person and in this role that I am. Otherwise, how do you do it on a day-to-day basis?
That's a wonderful question. I don't know how you do. And I'll actually bring this something back to your book. Not that you need more plugs. It's your own show, but I'll totally plug it. If you're listening to this and have not read Andy's book yet, go read it. I really enjoyed it. But one thing that struck to me kind of just on a larger scale is that one of the things that you were really talking about throughout the book is, the idea of being yourself, right? So how do you sell without selling out? You are yourself. You're authentic with who you are. You're authentic on a human level and engaging in an empathetic capacity with your prospects and clients. But that is actually the opposite of what the sales profession, and I'm going to put quotation marks there, has been doing over the last 20 years, because the reality is you can't, it's hard to scale authenticity, right? And so if you add, a point I think you make a number of times in the book is, hey, do what's right for you, not necessarily what your sales manager is or the sales trainer is trying to teach you. Because sales programs, while not inherently bad, I think you have to actually learn a lot of them so you then can, kind of integrate what works for you and what doesn't. But, you don't want people to kind of march to the beat of their own drummer. You're like, just follow this program, because we think it kind of is scalable. Now, you and I think, would disagree with that, but I think that's the mentality from a lot of these organizations. And by the way, it's very hard to develop self-awareness, or actually the value for self-awareness, if your larger context that you're in. If you are a young seller who has that first sales job and you just are getting this message from the people on high that, hey, you just got to do this. Again, it's hard to, self-awareness is not only an easy path, it's not an easy path to choose, I think. And that's why you get stats that half of sellers are unmemorable.
Yeah. Well, I think that I agree 100%. I think the issue is that for me with that is, and I use the word in the book, but it's not being intentional. And I think this is a part that's really difficult for a lot of people in sales, is to operate with intention about being themselves, about being of service to the buyer, about helping the buyer accomplish the things they need to accomplish in order to make a decision. Because to your very point, it oftentimes conflicts with what they believe they've been told about the process they need to follow and the steps they have to take and so on. And so, I think we give mixed messages to a lot of sellers that comes for a variety of reasons, right? I think that we don't do a good enough job in general trying to help frontline sales managers, oftentimes who are new at their roles, understand what they can best do to help their sellers. And so in the absence of great guidance about what that is, they default to the process, right? Well, this is the playbook. These are steps to go do. If you don't follow this, I'm going to be nervous, right? Because I can't justify to somebody that, hey, I let you do something different, because I don't have the confidence to be able to say, this is what sure, go ahead, do that. And I have confidence to get it done.
You might have done a horrible demo, but at least it was the demo that you were supposed to do, right? It didn't work and it was horrible and we lost the sale, but at least it's the thing that you learn that's in this playbook we developed, 2 years ago.
Well, that's easier for some managers. That is easier for
I
some
think it's easier
managers,
for
right?
most managers.
Is to take that.
And I think we even touched on this the last time we talked, thinking about guidance, and you said something I think really insightful there, the idea of how we are guiding and or not guiding our frontline salespeople. As somebody who's been a sales coach for, I know I look super young, but for over 2 decades, I mean, one of the right,
No.
part of my secret sauce has always been that idea, and I love what you said, that idea of intention or that idea of deliberateness. And one of the things that I've often talked to, coachees about is not is using, for example, accountability or using the conversation, the coaching conversation, as an excuse, as a way to get intentional about your activities, right? Because I think when you are intentional and then you try something, again, we're using this word intentional a lot, but if you're being very deliberate, hey, I'm going to try this maybe different sales approach. It may work, it may not, but if I was deliberate about it, at least then I can then figure out if it works or not, right? I wasn't just muddling along. It was like, I'm deliberately trying this. Holy crap, it worked. Okay, so let me examine that. Or I'm going to deliberately do this. It did not work. Let us re-examine this. And
I think that examination, that level of self-examination you're talking about is that inherent to being intentional about things. Is that I'm doing this for a reason, as opposed to just I'm taking this step, I'm acting this way, I'm presenting this way, I'm having this level of interaction this way, just because that's the way I was told to do it.
And I think, by the way, if you do that,
I mean, it's
so going back to our original point, like if you can do that on the sales process, and I think a lot of sellers aren't given that support, so they have to go and find it on their own, which can be hard. But if they go through that process, then the great thing is you can start doing that in your own, like the personal side of your life, right? I mean, that's where I think that self-awareness comes in, right?
For sure.
Just being like, hey, wait, am I being intentional in my conversations with my significant other, with friends or family? Am I being intentional with how I approach religion or spirituality or my emotional health, my mental health? It's wonderfully self-reinforcing that way, but to your point, it's also, if you don't start that process, you're just dead in the water.
Yeah. So that really then becomes question is, and this conversation I had with a number of people is, okay, what comes first, or chicken and the egg, right? Is because we have to enable frontline sales managers to feel comfortable to give their sellers a level of trust and autonomy to become self-aware, to act, to learn what's going to work for them, to experiment constantly. And this, I said, this is the difficult part, right? And I think I certainly empathize, I guess, to some degree with frontline managers that feel the pressure to deliver, but they too have to be intentional about what they're doing. And it works all the way up and down the line. Is if you're a frontline manager and you're feeling uncomfortable with the way that you're being managed and directed, then what are you going to do about it? Right? I mean, you can comply and be unhappy and unsuccessful. Or if you think there's perhaps something that's a better way that you would prefer to approach it, do you approach it with your boss? Or do you go find a situation where you can do what you need to do?
There's a lot of opportunities out there right now. That's for sure. I think on a very practical level, I mean, one thing that I've done in my career, I've seen other people do successfully, and something that I counsel people is incremental change is really powerful. And I think we often either dismiss that idea or we acknowledge it, but don't really act and go, oh yeah, incremental, that's great. That's, I remember an early, I think this is a Tony Robbins quote or who knows, I heard it early in my career, but the idea, what is it? We overestimate what we can change in a year, but underestimate what we can change in 10 years. And I mean, the time scale isn't what's important, but this idea that we're like, oh, I'm going to change things completely now, versus going and if you're a sales manager. I actually was talking to somebody about this recently. Like, what happens if you're in a situation where maybe you're not super comfortable with how you're being managed, or in this case, it was if you're not completely comfortable with what you're selling because of things that are not under your control. Like, do you stay? Do you go? What happens if you hey, I'd like to go, but I have financial responsibilities. I've got mortgage, a family, stuff like that. That's where I think that the idea of being incremental in making changes, while very unsexy and in the short term unsatisfying, at least starts moving you in the right direction, right? If I was a sales manager who was getting pressure from on high to manage in a certain way, and you're like, hey, that's not necessarily working, it's not me, and it's actually not helping my salespeople, I don't think you can necessarily go to your boss and be like, hey, screw you, I'm going to do everything my way. But I do think there's ways, for example, one of the things I think most sales managers don't do is coach, really coach. I mean, it's kind of a given, right?
Yeah, data seems.
But I mean, to as much as possible, and the idea of going, hey, we're gonna, if you're a sales manager who's like, hey, I need to really help my salespeople get better. I don't feel I've got a lot of time, but the thing that I would tell them if I was working with them is to go, great, set up 20 minutes a week at a specific time with each salesperson, right? And if you got 20, this is tough, but we can all do 5 to 7, and go, hey, with each of those people, pick one activity that they want to get better at, right? So, here, let's be really tactical. Say one thing that they want to be better at that we're going to talk about every week for 20 minutes. And we're going to when I talk about accountability with frontline salespeople, I'm always like, it's got to be answerable with a yes or a no, right? Meaning, I want to make more phone calls. I want to do more outreach. I want to be better at this. I can't answer that. More is not a yes or no. I want to get into the office at 7:30 every day, so I do my pre-work and I'm on the phone, or whatever your sales role is, at 9.
And then
I can say yes or no.
Right.
And what's really interesting, though, is I think that people mistake accountability, because then, the next week, let's say the sales rep doesn't do that. They go, well, okay, they didn't do it. That's horrible. And I go, no, that's just a fact. But if we were intentional about it, and again, it didn't happen, then we can go, why, right? And if you have that conversation with somebody every week, even just for 20 minutes, they're going to get better, right? They're going to improve. Or, by the way, they're not. And that's telling you something else too, right?
Right. Well, and I think one thing that's I'm hearing as you're talking about, which I think is we don't express out loud enough. I'm just sort of thinking about this because I was sort of you're watching your expression as well as you talk about it. It's this idea that to some degree we want to please the people we work for, right? Not just we want to hit the number, but we also want to please people too, and there's some motivation in there. But I think what for me is I see sort of mixed up so much is just you want to please people, but you also have to be operating in alignment with the way you think you want to operate. And this is for me as part of intention is maybe I had the great good fortune early in my career to sort of have this moment where it sort of struck me as and I write about this in the book is I can't act this way, right? The way they were being trained, the way they want to act is I just can't do that. But I still want to do the job, and I wanted to learn, and I knew that really almost from the beginning is I was going to have to sort of navigate my own path in that. But at the same time, I did want to make my sales manager happy
and
hit my
job.
numbers.
Make some money.
Yeah. So, there's always this little push-pull, right? You experience. But I think
oh, no, sorry.
Sorry.
I think you're absolutely right. And you just even said something like, I don't think we express this enough. It's not even just this topic, but just there's a lot that doesn't get expressed in sales conversations. And when I'm maybe specifically internal, not selling, we're really talking about coaching and management.
Coaching conversation.
I've actually always found, for me personally, and I was a really horrible sales manager when I first started, right? I mean, I definitely fell under the yeah, well,
But we all
but
are.
a
I'm sure we are.
very stereotypical, really top salesperson, got into more of a management leadership role and just was like, just do this. I mean, this is easy. Why aren't you doing it? So definitely had to get beat over the head. And just because I was stubborn enough, I just kept at it. I was like, I'm going to figure this out. But one of the things that I found was very valuable for me and kind of is part of all of what we're saying here is this idea of being forthright and truthful, not only with yourself, but now we're talking about, like in a coaching conversation with the person, like saying, hey, you're really struggling with this. What's up? Why? Like, let's not, pretend. I've had salespeople tell me like, I mean, the best, and you don't always want this is, but when they're like, I actually don't like this job. And you're like, okay. I mean, it's not that they're being told to do it the wrong way. It's like, they're in the wrong place. You're like,
Not a fit.
awesome, right? Let's find a way to transition you into the next role, so we can still shake hands at the end and be friends. But that comes from being honest and forthright in a conversation. I also know, I've seen this situation where you're like, that person should have left 3 years ago, but they can't be honest with their manager. Their manager's like not being honest with them. And this goes back to a self-awareness, not from a salesperson's perspective, but then from sales leadership perspective. Like, you want to be a good sales manager, a good sales coach. What are you doing for you to be self-aware? Even to be able to say, hey, I'm really frustrated with you right now because of, I feel you're not doing what we talked about, but that's on me, that my frustration's on me. Let's talk about this, right?
Well, I think some of that self-awareness for me really comes from the fact that a hard thing for sales managers to learn is to let go.
Right.
And it gets back to this idea of trust, really. Trust that people will do what they need to do. The people are working for you. If you give them enough good guidance, direction, that, I always like to sort of create frameworks for people and say, hey, within this framework, it's really up to you how you're going to operate beyond that, right? For me, if the people that took the initiative within that, and because I love to coach, for me, I liked knowing everything. I said I don't like to be a micromanager, but I liked knowing that people knew everything, right? So if I was challenging people in coaching, it was just not to give explicit direction, but just to make sure they were asking the right questions and they understood as much as possible. But then, you let them go to say, look, at some point they're going to do something, and you're going to see it. You're going to say, okay, if they go do that, they're going to ruin this deal, they're going to lose it or whatever. And I think that's a hard thing for most managers. And I learned it early on from a really good manager who was he was prepared to let people fail. Right? He could have told them, no, do this. Instead, it was, well, tell me why would you do that? Let's get into this. What's the situations you're seeing? What help do you need from me on this? And let people sort of problem solve. And sometimes you have to let people learn through failure.
One of the best ways to learn how to deal with an objection, for example, in sales, is to not be able to answer that objection and watch that big sale walk out the door, so to speak, right? You'll learn how to respond the right way for next time.
Right, but as a manager, it's sometimes you're coaching somebody, and instead of being a helicopter parent equivalent and saying, look, I'm going to fix this, I think one of the things that helped me be successful as managers, the lesson I learned from that one previous manager was, I learned it because I was watching the interaction of that person that I learned from, this mentor, with another employee, and sort of sitting in the meeting saying, he's not going to tell them what to do because he knows so what they want to do is not right. I get it. He's going to let them go out and find this lesson out themselves. And it was a huge lesson for me is because my temptation would just say, no, you're completely wrong on this. I've seen this many times, do this. No. Okay, if you think that's the best approach to go try it.
I love that, and I think you nailed it on the head. It's trust, right? Well, I think there's two things. I think there's be willing to trust people, and trust is not I'm going to trust you to do the right thing or say the right thing all the time. I'm going to trust you to move through that process and hopefully do the right thing. And if you do the wrong thing, to learn from it. I think that also gets to something also that's I don't know what you're saying. Maybe we've lost a bit in sales is kind of that long-term commitment to the people we do work with, and have, as managers, yeah. Or I mean, definitely you can even say that as a salesperson managing up. But if you look at somebody and you're like, hey, I want you to be successful here. I will do everything I can for you to be successful here. I want you to have a long and storied career here, right? Acknowledging, yes, there's a lot of unknowns in life. Then you can have that trust, right? Then you can say, hey, yes, you might lose this one sale, but it's okay as long as we learn for the next 5. And I think that goes to even some of the stuff we've seen over the last, and it's been around for a while, but definitely in the last, let's say, I don't know, 10, 15 years, where it's like, hey, I need to get my number this quarter, right, this week, and I will burn. I mean, as salespeople, that's why I think you get a lot of that behavior. Whatever I can do to get that that order in now, that deal done today, even if I'm burning bridges, or hey, I get that one sale and I burn the bridges completely with 9 others.
Well, being super salesy just to get a deal.
And it goes. I guess my point is it goes up the chain though. If you know you're going to be committed to the success of an individual long term, you can let them make mistakes. You can not have to micromanage them a little bit. But that's to your point, that goes all the way up the chain, right? So you have to know that upper management and leadership is saying, hey, we're committed to you, and that doesn't always happen. So,
well, I mean, it raises a question, which interested in your take on this is I think by and large, what I call sales behaviors, bad sales behaviors, start at the top and work their way down.
Oh, 100%. I mean, that's not even sales behavior. That's culture, right? I mean, that's organizational culture.
Yeah, but people are so quick to want to blame the salesperson, right? Because who has the bad reputation? It's the individual salesperson, right? Oh, they're super salesy, right? I mean, even just in our movies and TV shows, right? Yeah. It's the salesperson they're that way because someone's allowing them to be that way. Right?
Yeah,
they work for someone.
At the best, they're allowing it. I think at the worst, and what's often more common is not that they're being allowed to do that; it's that they're encouraged or being forced to do that. Right?
Encouraged to do it. Right.
I mean, yes, the salesperson. Let's say they're doing some spammy sort of duplicitous outreach behavior. That's because the sales manager told them to do it, and the marketing department helped them put it together. Which is because their director of sales, VP of marketing, whatever, those people got together and they're like, we got to hit these numbers. So whatever we can do this quarter. So where did that come from? That came from the C-suite. Yeah, and then you could say that then came from, depending on the organization, shareholders. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's why. One of my favorite examples of that is I get asked, where does discounting start? Who's responsible for discounting? And I always say, well, it's sales managers.
Right. Yeah.
Right? I mean, Mike's been almost uniformly, and obviously there's situations unique if you give salespeople a lot of free rein relative to pricing and so on. But assuming that people operating within bounds is extreme discounting or reliance on it. For me, what I've seen, it starts with the managers. As I have, my theory is it's a theory of surplus, and the surplus is there's a surplus of unretired quota. It's just like if you run a store and you've got inventory on the shelves at the end of the month. What do?
Discount it, get it out the door.
Discount it, right, to get it off the shelves. Well, in this case, what's on the shelves is unretired quota. And so the managers look at it and say, well, we've got a surplus of unretired quota. How do we get rid of that?
Discount it. We get rid of it. Absolutely. I mean, I think you can even, to not only agree with you, but to go a step further, then you can also look at those organizations, not only the sales manager, but then you look, who put together the comp package, which, and this, for example, I've seen organizations where the salespeople aren't really dinged for discounting, right? Meaning they're going to make just as much money either way, right? Which
Right, the comp's not based on
right.
gross profit.
So if you think about it,
yeah.
even then, whoever's in charge of that comp package design, which could be, everywhere from VP of sales on up, they're creating the structure, right? I mean, I think one of the things that's been fascinating, and I know that both you and I love reading extensively in non-sales literature, but
Right.
one of the things that's come out of behavioral psychology, for example, last 20 or 30 years, is the importance of context, right? Like we don't make decisions just based on our own personal, mental framework. It's, the environment we live in. It's, peer pressure is a thing, or,
Right.
the fascinating book Nudge, where they talk about like how you
Right. No,
how you structure the environment. How you structure your sales environment will actually determine what your salespeople do and how they act. So I think you're exactly right. It's not this. It's easy to blame the frontline individual contributor, but there's a reason they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah, that's the context, right? That they operate in. Absolutely. Well, and so, but for me, and interesting your thought on this is so I think that because I'm just fascinated, have been for a long time, about this idea of performance and who's responsible for certain levels of performance, and so I guess my question for you is to some degree, I look at sales managers, and this is a rough analogy, but as having quality control responsibility. That the salespeople that work for them are basically like a product, right? And that product is an individual who can go out and operate at a certain level in a predictable fashion, right? And so that's really the job of a sales manager, right? And my job is to develop these individuals in such a way and manage them, coach them, so that they can predictably achieve a certain level of performance, that being quota. So if you have, and we see the latest report on this topic, I think it was Bravado put out something earlier this year, 46% of sellers don't make quota, or only 46% do make quota, excuse me, so a minority. So isn't that really sort of a quality control issue, this gap between, I mean, if you were a factory manager and your job was to make widgets that operate at a certain level of predictable performance, how long would you last if you could only 46% of what you manufactured met spec?
So I think the
point being is, shouldn't there be more almost like a quality control aspect to this that we apply to sales management? And that I don't see that emphasis. I see, you're either making it or not, and we're going to try to coach you up, but it seems like we have a different lens we could look at things through that might help managers. Well, I think we changed our comp, that would help as well.
Right.
Well, no, I think that I think you could largely solve the issue of reps not making quota, if a substantial portion of a sales manager's variable compensation was based on the number of their sellers that achieve quota.
I agree.
So, like, if I said, and not a percentage, but like if you were to pay a manager, this is my latest idea on this, pay a manager. Let's say they had 10 sellers, and just hypothetical example is they would get a flat fee for each one that achieved quota. So like, $1,000, $2,000. Not a percentage, but a flat fee per seller.
Yes or no, do they hit quota?
Yeah, and you get a bonus for each one. I'll bet you, we'd see instantaneous changes in terms of the percentage of sellers that hit quota. Because what happened is then sales managers would go to their bosses and say, look, conversation, let's talk about our numbers.
Let's actually figure out what that quota number actually is, becomes.
What that quota is, absolutely is, right? Because I think a good chunk of the fact that why reps aren't making quotas is they're set arbitrarily high, right? But this sort of feeds into this vicious cycle of where if we have such a large percentage of sellers aren't hitting quota, are we basically dooming them to almost never hitting quota? Because what we're saying is, the way human psychology works is, how do you build confidence in people? Well, you let them experience some success. And once people have experienced success, my experience has been, I think the research will show, they want to keep continuing success, experiencing success. So we do a huge disservice to people. I've had this conversation with numerous sales leaders is, when you're starting off, is make sure that people are going to crush it the first year or two, right? Even if they have lower numbers, even if their targets are more achievable, make sure that you put them in a position where they experience this success. Because if they do, then they're going to be hungry for more success. And you can continue to grow their numbers and so on. But it's just like, okay, we want to change that equation about percentage of reps hitting quotas. Yeah, there's things we could do. Change the manager's comp to make sure they did.
I actually think you'd have to change the managers, not only their comp, but so interestingly enough, your idea about quality control and managers being responsible for quality control, I actually think that is the current model, and that's actually the challenge. Because what I think for a lot of sales organizations, they started to look as a salesperson, not as a salesperson. There's like, hey, there's X number of sales seats. We slot a cog in there. They should be able to follow some program. We're going to give them X number of leads, or however they're going to develop their pipeline, and they should hit this percentage, and we'll get X amount of revenue from them. So hey, if we want to increase revenue, we either have to have more headcount, or we're just going to double quota for them. But then as a sales manager, they're just looking at it as how do I optimize this machine versus how do I actually grow the success of this individual, right? So I would almost say that's what's created this mentality where be salesy, follow the program. Here's the 7 steps. And I also think, by the way, when you're talking about quality control, what you're really just saying is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the idea of actually having a more, kind of like oversight into the success of the individuals who are working for you, right?
Exactly, because you wouldn't. I think if and again, not to be too harsh about sales managers, because you and I both been through that role in multiple levels and so on, is that if frontline managers end up the chain, right? They'll start there and build up. If you really cared about the individual, wouldn't you change what you're doing? And I can't talk today. Wouldn't you change what you're doing in order to ensure that a higher fraction of your reps actually hit the number? For me, that was hugely important. I wanted to have everybody, if possible, which wasn't always possible, to be successful, right? And this is, I don't think managers, so oftentimes, I think increasingly these days, to your point precisely about people being sort of interchangeable cogs in a machine, in certain industry segments, have not looked at it that way. I use the expression before as people are sort of cannon fodder, which is unfortunate case. I think,
and it's also unfortunate too, because if we want to take this beyond just a sales role, I mean, we all know turnover is expensive, right? So if leadership outside of sales leadership is going, hey, we want to make sure we're bringing in revenue, we want to minimize costs, like churning and burning salespeople is not the way to do it. To something you just said, like even if you're starting them with a smaller, quota that first 6 months, that first year. I mean, I've always said, and I don't know what you'd say about this, but I think it takes 6 months to a year to actually learn a sales role, right? This idea that you can just, even if you've got sales skills, it takes. So being able to look someone in the eye and say,
it's still an apprenticeship. I think this is the part
100%.
that there's certain schools have thought about this is, yeah, we can onboard people in 6 weeks, they'll be productive and so on. It's like, you're learning a trade. No one learns a trade. And certainly, and the thing, again, I'm wandering here. The thing is that people talk about being, onboarding, they get to quote unquote full productivity within this fixed period of time, 6 weeks, 90 days, whatever. Again, just an illusion. People don't.
Well, we already know that only 54% or 54% don't ever, right, hit full productivity.
Yeah.
So yeah, but
Right.
it sounds sexy. It sounds sexy to say, hey, in 90 days you're going to have these sales reps up and running. But yeah, to your point, it's just not true. It would be scary for, I think, a lot of organizations to say, hey, you know what, we're gonna bring on X number of new people, and we're gonna invest in them because we want them to be long term. We're gonna realize a profit on the back end by not turning over as many people, right? And so we're going to commit to them for a year,
Well, I read.
right? Or whatever it is, and be like, let's help them be successful. And
Yeah, well, I just remember reading about this program. I think it was is that a university somewhere? I forget where it was, but basically they are, maybe it's even at high school level. I'm trying to remember this exact article, but it's about working with kids coming from underprivileged backgrounds that were going to maybe struggle academically initially because they're in a more competitive environment and so on. And they had this program, this school, and again, I'm blanking on the exact details, but I remember they had this program, like I think they called it Freshman on Track. And what they did is just made sure that the freshmen stayed on track, on a certain track, which they had defined as sort of this minimal level of performance, but is more than minimum. I mean, it was something that was going to help make sure that they learned what they needed to learn, didn't fall behind academically, picked up the skills they needed. And yes, it was, not super high level, but it was made sure they were on track, right? So no one was left behind. And I was reading about this thinking, oh, this is a brilliant idea in terms of sales. Is instead of the way we do things now, 90 days, 6 weeks, or whatever, we throw people to the wolves, is say, no, first year, everybody, super nurturing program, right? And not everybody has to make it sink or swim. And we're going to have this, salesperson on track program. We're going to ensure that, no one's left behind.
You just made me think of the sales training program that for those of us of a certain age is still kind of regarded as like one of the top. I mean, that was Xerox back in the day, and Xerox was known for having a two-year training apprenticeship program where like you basically went out as a newbie, and you were paired with an experienced. For part of it, you were paired with an experienced salesperson, and you literally went out with them for whatever it was, 6 months or something like that as part of this whole program, because they're like, yeah, you got to learn a bunch. There's obviously a technical side of it. And yes, that's obviously quite an investment on Xerox's part, but they did well enough that Xerox the brand name became the name for the process. They did okay for themselves, right?
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I think you're spot on, and I think it takes a mindset shift, and I think the organizations that we see on a sales side that are already doing it, to your point, it's coming from leadership, right? It's coming from the top where they're like, hey, we're committed to having people where we're not having crazy turnover. We're trying to find people who want to have a home here. So unfortunately, I don't think we can fix all that with a wave of a wand, but.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll try. Do you ever want?
I don't know. In my kid's playroom, there's probably one buried there somewhere.
I think, didn't you have a Harry Potter wand? I thought you did.
I don't think so.
Don't talk about that, he says. All right, David, great to have you on the show.
I never know what we're going to talk about, and I love our conversations.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure I did today either. One of those days, But it's fantastic. And so enjoy.
I will.
Ferris John.
For sure.
those days go by very quickly, as you know.
I do.
Right.
As I say, the days are long, but the years are short. The days are long, but the years are short. So,
Oh, I like that. Yeah. No, I have very distinct memories with my eldest, who's my business partner. Um he was, yeah, probably certainly less than a year. Was still an infant, wasn't toddling around yet. And yeah, I used to love laying on the couch on a Sunday afternoon, watching a football game and falling asleep in front of the football game with him with me on the couch.
nice.
And it's just like, right? That cuddling, you miss that cuddling
I'm
thing when
trying
you
to
get
cut.
older.
The cuddles I've been told do not
Capture
last. So
those.
I'm gonna get as many cuddles as I can.
Yeah, yeah, they don't last, and it's yeah. You think as a parent, now we're jonesing for grandkids, right? But yeah, as a parent, you're yeah, the moment where you normally would walk across the street holding your kid's hand, then yeah, you do it, and
Yeah.
they're like, nah, yeah, slap your
Right,
hand
right.
away.
I'm gonna soak it all up right now for
All
sure.
right, enjoy it for
Thank you.
sure, right? All right, well, have a great weekend, and we'll
Sounds
talk to you
great.
soon.
Okay, friends, that's it for this episode. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. As always, I'm so grateful for your support of the show. And I want to thank my guest, my friend David J.P. Fisher, D-Fish, for sharing his insights with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And as always, thank you so much for investing your time with me today. Until next time, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.